Hi guys, thank you for your patience. We're going to start now. So thank you for joining us at Delta here in Edinburgh on a really lovely, beautiful, sunny day. We're going to be talking about how to make money in new energy and number 4. So hopefully some of you will be familiar with our series, but we've looked at some of our work around the business model service, and this is 4 out of 6 webinars that we'll be running. So a quick introduction. Quick introduction to your host for today. I'm Charmaine Coutinho. So I'm a principal analyst here at Delta Energy and Environment, and I work primarily on the new energy business model service, which is the core of the research that we'll be talking to today. And I'd like to introduce my colleague Kitty.
Hello everyone, I'm Kitty Dutton and I'm an analyst split between the New Energy Business Model Research Service and our Customer Data Analytics Research Service. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see some of our recent and upcoming public webinars. The Customer Data Analytics Service that I'm on did the last one, looking into how utilities are using customer data to improve engagement and enhance their service offerings. And in just under a week, I think it is, our next webinar will be from our heat team, sharing some of the recent highlights of their research into the UK heating market and consumer attitudes to low carbon heating.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to run through a bit of background to Delta and some of the work that we've done, and we'll finish off with some questions at the end, but I'll come on to that in a minute. So today we're going to talk about one of the categories that we've looked at in our research, which we termed efficient consumption. So it's probably good to start with what do we mean by that. We're talking fundamentally about energy efficiency. So whenever from the times that consumers had to pay for energy, we've always wanted to reduce the amount we pay, and taking some of the early innovations, so things like insulation, which we've highlighted as a single measure category. Things like insulation, reducing demand, turning off lights, that kind of things. We see that as the core bit of.
Oh, we've just had a quick message to show the screen, so apologies about that. We thought that we were sharing the slides and going through those.
Yeah, sorry about that.
We'll just do that now. So stop sharing screen. Just have a look at audience view.
Wonderful, there we go. Yes, apologies for that. So let me recap on that. What do we mean by efficient consumption? So in our research, we cover 3 categories within this area. So I've just talked briefly around the single measure, but also we see the 2 emerging categories which we'll focus on later on in the webinar, one of which is around how to assess your energy usage remotely, which we term remote audits of energy usage. And the second one being around how you would approach a retrofitting and refurbing a house, but in a productized, complete way. So those 3 categories are ones we'll touch on. There's a lot of interesting innovation in this area, and we will be looking at those 2 in particular detail. So as a brief agenda, there's going to be a brief introduction to Delta in the context of how this research fits into the other work that we do. We'll look at how data in particular is revolutionising the energy efficiency market, which Kitty will cover off. We're then going to look at what innovations and what ideas we're seeing emerging, and then we'll look at what the biggest challenges are to success in this field. So this is a really, really hot topic. There's lots of work going on. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the questions box in the side of your software. We'll address them at the end, but we will get to them. And if we run out of time, we'll get in contact with you after the end of the session. So for those of you who've not been following our series, Delta Energy Environment, we're a consultancy focusing on research and consultancy services to our clients to help them transition from old energy to new energy. When we say new energy, we mean distributed, low carbon and customer centric. So there's a brief summary of our clients and the work that we do. those of you who've been through these webinars before will be very familiar with this slide. Actually, today we're talking about the business models research that we've done. So it's the work that I do and Kitty does, and we see some really interesting overlaps with our customer data analytics work. So that's the kind of key areas that we're going to cover today. One of the things we showed in a previous webinar, and it's good to flag here, is we have a lot of work going on in our Smart Energy customer panel. We don't cover it explicitly here, but for those of you that are interested in how customers are actually using some of the business models come up, it's worthwhile you guys having a look at the work we do there. So again, those of you who are familiar with our research, that this are the new energy business model research and the series of webinars, will be quite familiar with this slide, but this is a way of us understanding all of the different types of business models that are available in the marketplace. So what we've focused on is looking at the hundreds of business models that are emerging. So on the left-hand side of this diagram, we shows kind of an indication of the kinds of companies we look at, and what we've done within that is select 50 of the ones that we think are particularly interesting or demonstrate a particular characteristic or route to market or innovation that we think is fundamentally different to what's happened before. We have written some detailed case studies about them, and then we've used them as the kind of almost like the grassroots evidence base for us to put together a framework, which is the middle column. So 6 categories within that framework, and we've run a webinar about each of those categories. So we're on number 4, and we'll come on to that in a bit. The other work that we're working on at the moment is looking at, from a strategic point of view, so what's interesting about those different frameworks and how can they be applied to your business. So as I mentioned, we've done 3 of the 6 categories so far. So marketplace operations, which looks at transactions within the energy system, how that's changing. Energy as a service, which is looking at more outcome-based approaches to providing energy. Time of use optimization, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with. And today we'll be focusing on efficient consumption. Now, all of the previous webinars are available on our YouTube channel, but if you are interested in any of them, please feel free to email us and we can provide you with the slides.
So in today's, following the agenda, we're going to start with a more contextual overview of whether data is revolutionizing the efficiency market. To put this into a bit of context, you probably have all heard of the concept of big data. This refers to the insights that can be gathered through analytics of large data sets, revealing patterns, trends, and associations, especially relating to human behavior. We live in an ever more connected world, and this has resulted in huge amounts of data becoming available. But before discussing the effect that this is having on the efficient consumption industry, it will be really interesting to see what you, as members of this sector and the wider energy sector as a whole, think. So we'd like to start, if we may, with a poll question.
So those of you familiar with Delta's webinars, you know we're very, very fond of a poll, so bear with us. And what we're asking today is,
sorry, we're just pulling it up.
So what do you think, from your perspective, is the data? What role do you think data plays in the future of the energy efficiency market? So do we think it is? Do you think it's essential? Do you think it's important but peripheral and a bit of a kind of not a core red herring? Do you think there's other factors that are going to be more important? So, for example, the actual technical solution or how this is actually delivered. And do you think it's a massive distraction? So we're just in the process of collecting responses. It's good to see most people have voted. That's great. Wow, very, very interesting. So we will share these results in a minute. So we'll just give a few minutes for people to vote. Okay, that's great. So I'm just going to close voting now. And we're just going to share the results. So, interesting. I think you'll all agree there's a big consensus that everyone believes it's essential, and no one thinks it's a distraction, which is good to know. So, very interesting. I think we in this room are probably broadly in agreement with you. I think the question that we hope to kind of talk around today is the how. So, great stuff. Thank you very much for that. We're just going to move on to our slide. Next slide. So here we go. Okay. So that was our poll. Over to Kitty.
Right. So I agree. I think data is probably going to be essential. And in this section, we're going to talk about how big data could be used by the efficient consumption energy and the numerous options that are available before later moving on to what we have found to be gaining the most traction. So as many of you will know, smart meters are becoming ever more prevalent as they are mandatorily rolled out across most European countries, some of which, like Sweden, already have 100% penetration. This means that there is now far more data available about customers' consumption habits, not only from smart meters, but also from various other hardware, including sensors, clamps, CADs, smart plugs, sockets, smart thermostats, and a plethora of connected devices. Taken together, such hardware is resulting in massive amounts of energy data becoming available. This data in its own is not particularly valuable or useful. It's just information. But when analysed, it can prove incredibly valuable through the insights that it delivers, not only to final customers about their individual usage, but also to the companies that serve them. This includes energy suppliers, but there are various other companies and industries that can benefit from these insights, such as product manufacturers or insurance companies, to name a few. So focusing on how the insights can be used, one, they can improve customer experience by, say, helping them to stay on top of their energy usage and expenses, or they can introduce new products and services, for example, time of use tariffs or remote appliance maintenance by tracking how devices are consuming energy against how they ideally should be. And ultimately, companies that have these insights have the option of further monetizing this data by selling it on to third parties or forming partnerships with industries and companies that are better able to extract value from it. An example might be insurance firms who can use energy data to establish how often a person is at home and then offer more reasonable rates if they are frequently there. If you are interested in this topic, do check out our customer data analytics service because we are exploring this topic in great detail at the moment. And one final thing I will note before moving on is this entire process is very iterative. So the insights and services created on the back of energy customer data can then be further analysed and produce even more data, which improves the analytics and algorithms being used to analyse it and results in even greater value being extracted.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point to note. It's I don't think we can emphasise it enough, really. So this is all about the iterative qualities of data getting better and better each time you use it, or each time you process it, or each time you add more in. So it just makes all of the topics that Kitty's just talked through more robust, more accurate, and hopefully providing a clearer picture. We will come back onto that.
So that section I just covered applies to the energy sector as a whole. But today we're here to discuss efficient consumption. So I thought it'd be useful to provide a few examples of the benefits that can be gained from the insights specifically for the efficient consumption industry. So first, in considering improving customer experience, I mentioned that customers can be informed of how much energy they are using and when and why. This then allows for the provision of actionable insights that allow customers to know how best to reduce their energy usage and therefore save money. We've all had that horrible feeling where you get a large bill at the end of a month and you're not quite sure why. This helps customers to break down the bill and to take steps to reduce it whilst avoiding horrible bill shock. It can also improve customer experience as a result, because if you call up your energy company questioning why you have such a large bill, they are able to either identify if a problem has arisen or are able to break it down for you and help you take steps to avoid the unpleasant surprise in the future. New products and services are also emerging. So I mentioned time of use tariffs. These, prior to the advent of big data, these were not an option. And now with more granular data becoming available, customers are able to make use of fluctuations in wholesale electricity prices to use electricity at a time when it is cheapest. And it also is opening up the way for them to participate in a domestic demand response market going forward.
And what's actually really interesting about this is, it's perfectly possible if you had enough people to look at this data and analysing the Excel spreadsheets that you can do this without big data. But I think the point that we've seen is certainly that big data makes this much easier, much quicker, much faster, much more accurate.
Makes it worthwhile. Another example of a new product or service emerging is that of remote product maintenance. So companies are able to track how individual appliances are using energy, and based on statistical analysis of various load profiles, are able to determine if it's not performing optimally and why that may be. This means that no longer would you have to wait for your boiler to break down and therefore be freezing and have to wait for a repairman, but you could get a call in advance saying you may need to look into this and prevent catastrophe, which is very useful. And finally, potential revenue streams. I mentioned that customer data can be monetized by selling it on to interested parties. With the remote maintenance idea, this could be a repair company, for example, which would then, with the knowledge of how an appliance is not performing optimally, repair companies would be able to not only schedule appropriately, knowing who and why may need help, but they'll know the problem before they get there. So by the time they arrive, they will have the necessary parts, they will know how to fix it, and it will streamline the entire service process. So efficient consumption can therefore make for more efficient operations as well. And this will produce a win-win, both by improving customer satisfaction, but also reducing cost to serve.
Yeah, I mean, that's the really important point, I think, is that all of this has the potential to provide both a lower cost to serve, so additional revenue from not needing to provide revenue and a base in the same way, but also your customer satisfaction is improved, so it's a better experience for customers, which in theory should lead on to retention and maybe a greater propensity to buy other services and trust you as an energy provider or a product manufacturer more. So lots of potential in this. So we're going to move on to which innovations we see in this efficient consumption category, talking through those two subcategories that I spoke about earlier, and some actual specific examples of interesting players. So the diagram that Kitty just spoke through, this massive amount of data, all these insights, which should be brilliantly useful. How is this actually playing out? And I think probably what's useful to start talking through as a start is what do I mean by remote audits? So when we talk about it at Delta, and in particular for the business model service, we're talking about an assessment of a building, so a house or a commercial building, assessment of their energy demand, where you don't have to come onto site to make that assessment. From a very simple basis, it might be a bill, but actually the way we're looking at the moment is it's much more granular. You can pinpoint which particular appliances, when customers are using that, and the important point is that it's remote. So in theory, if I ran one of these companies or if I bought this software, I could pinpoint exactly what a house on a street in Germany would look like without even leaving the office from Edinburgh. So there's a real powerful kind of idea that it transcends the global boundaries or physical location, which is very attractive and kind of obviously, but not necessarily. Big data is a really important part of that. So it enables that to be possible, full stop, by making it cost effective. It enables that data to be much more accurate and granular. So for example, you can disaggregate your energy demand in the home or in a building to different appliances, which wasn't necessarily possible before. And that makes it much more useful from a utility point of view. So that's the first category. We've added the sub point, which is and engagement. So that is mainly taking all of these insights and all of this data and actually providing what Kitty referred to as actionable insight. So prompts to people to do something, whether it's switching off your lights as a very simple example, or whether it is preemptive maintenance of a boiler, which is another great example. The second category, which we can refer to as complete building retrofits, it's not the catchiest of titles, but it's quite a complex concept and very, very embryonic at this moment in time. So going back to the previous slide, which talked about single energy efficiency measures, this takes that approach and bundles it all together. So it takes multiple measures. So in our icon that we've got on the screen, it's double glazing, it's insulation, it's more effective hot water systems, it might be a bit of renewables, it might be looking at leaks in your home, it might be changing your light bulbs. Takes all of these measures, it packages them up and puts them in a bundle together, and it delivers them to an existing building in a productized form. So this is not about a one-off refurb project, but this is about looking at a type of building, working out how you can address the energy efficiency issues in all of that type of building, and then going to each site and doing them. So the idea is you look at this on a volume basis, and so you get the economies of scale, so it actually makes it financially viable. So in order to do that, you need to have a lot of data modelling about what impacts on a particular housing stock these measures will have and how they interact together. So when we were preparing for this webinar, I was trying to think of a great example which demonstrates why this is important. And one of our researchers came up with the following example. So if you put some insulation in your home, that's great. You save some money on your energy bill. But quite common, especially in the UK, is that the insulation, depending on where you put it, can cause issues with damp, which is an unintended consequence. So the companies looking at this complete building retrofit process will consider all of these issues together. So if I put some insulation here, will it cause damp here? In which case, that's not the right solution, or we need to tweak it. So it's quite a complex, quite a sophisticated way of looking at energy efficiency, quite embryonic, as we'll come on to in a minute, and very, 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 very heavily weighted towards the data and modelling. So that's kind of a bit of an overview about what types of the business models are in the marketplace. We'll now look at who is providing those and where we see the value, why people are doing it, and for the providers, and who the target market is. So in this remote audit of energy usage, so this is about primarily it manifests itself as a visual representation to a customer, an end user. So that could be on their desktop, on their mobile phone, on a tablet, in a graphical form, maybe represented as a financial currency, so how much money you spent on your bill so far. And that typically is delivered by a software company. So what's very interesting about this is we are seeing lots and lots of activity in this area. So there's strong competition from software companies. A great example would be OPower. So an American firm got bought by Oracle about 3 or 4 years ago, providing utility companies with data and then actionable insights for that data. So primarily, these software companies provide their services through a software as a service model, so typically a license fee, and a natural progression on this is for them to provide those actionable insights. What's interesting is we see pretty much wholesale that these companies are working with utilities as a route to market. So they would sell their software offering to a utility, and the utility would apply it to their customer base, and the customers would see the end result probably branded up with the utility partners' logos. So it's a real B2B2C, very little activity direct to customers. Maybe a few who are looking at energy management systems or building management systems. So probably a little bit more common in the commercial market. Lots of competition. In the second category, this complete building retrofit category, we are seeing very few providers. So a little bit activity in continental Europe, and mainly from, given the speciality of skills, mainly from specialist providers in the existing energy efficiency market, the construction market, and a very simple business model which is based on a product and a service margin. And these guys are going direct to consumers. It's not about a one-off refurb, but to deliver this, it's direct to the customer. So lots of interesting business models here. The so what about this? So how is this market evolving? It's almost completely at opposite ends of the spectrum. So if I just touch on the single property retrofit, we see this kind of the market for providing single measures like insulating a home or putting in double glazing. We still see that as having a really strong marketplace. It's not fundamentally new, so we haven't covered it in a great amount of detail, but it's still worthwhile. In this remote audit space, as we said before, big data having a huge impact, but it also means that setting up these companies is actually fairly straightforward. Whether they're successful or not is a different question, but it's very easy to set these companies up, and therefore we're seeing a lot of activity from startups and venture capitalists funding a lot of these business models. So a good example of this is Monzo, which we covered in past webinars and in some of our research. It's very kind of it's very straightforward for these companies to enter a marketplace and approach companies, whether utility companies, how successful they are in this remains to be seen. What we were surprised at when we looked at this sector was how little people had connected this up to social media, so how to take these insights and gamify them. So there was a lot of discussion about this in maybe 2012, 2013, but we've not seen a huge amount of innovations in this area. We do touch on a couple of examples in our research service, but we think that's a potential progression for this marketplace. The challenge with this is there's so much competition. There's so many people who are available who can do this, who can start up doing this. If we look at the complete building retrofits markets, a great example of this is Energy Sprong, which a lot of people have hopefully heard of. They are a Dutch company who are looking at this mass manufacturer process and applying it to the building sector. So the complexity of this, the fact that you have to think about so many different feeds, have so many different trades on site, means that actually it's really embryonic. It's quite hard. It's got quite a high ticket price for the end customer. So we're not seeing a huge customer drive for this, but we think that it is very, 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 very disruptive if we can combine finance and policy incentives across both of them. It could potentially disrupt the energy efficiency market quite substantially. I think one of the other kind of comments on this is there's a huge trend here of first mover advantage in this. So if you take the example of a software company, the very fact that you have that iterative data algorithm feedback loop, I think, for want of a better phrase, you get so much, so you kind of develop this really sophisticated algorithm, and it's really hard to leapfrog to that space. So I think that's a real challenge for some of the many competitors that are entering into the space. So just by having the data for a few years gives you a bit of a head start. And from a retrofit or complete building refit market point of view, it's the same principle. Yeah, there's so much data to process. It's a question of churning through it all.
Okay, thanks for that, Charmaine. So moving on, we're going to consider what we see as being the biggest challenges to success in this field. And once again, we're going to call on you to join in. So we would like to know what you think is the primary barrier to the activation and success of efficient consumption business models going forward. I appreciate that you may feel that all of these play some role, but we're interested to know what you think is the biggest one at this moment in time. So policy and regulation does not support the innovation. This is particularly relevant to the retrofit service we were talking about. There's not enough financial value in it for service providers. The scale and logistics of retrofits. Energy efficiency is perceived as boring. We may be able to help people save energy, but do they really care? And finally, end users don't really know where to start. So there's so many offerings available, there is a risk of paralysis through choice. So we'll just give you a few minutes to vote and have a think on that.
So yeah, I think this is when we were thinking about this question, this is quite a challenging one actually, to know which one is the primary challenge, and it obviously depends on your organisation that you're based in and your role. But I think looking at this, given that arguably this category is one of the oldest in terms of maturity, so energy efficiency has been around for years, obviously. So what makes this fundamentally different? Who knows? So we'll give you a couple more seconds to vote, and we'll close it in about 10 seconds. I'm not going to do a countdown.
Some pretty interesting results.
Yeah, it's fluctuated. Okay, I think we're going to close it there. Last few people voting. Thanks very much. Brilliant. So I'm just going to share the results. So as you can see, there's a real even split of who, across those three categories. So not enough financial value. I think, I think we definitely agree with that being a perception. I think it's a real challenge. I mean, I think that's why we have so many businesses starting up in this software market. And the end user piece, I think obviously all this depends on them. So yeah, I think that's great. Okay, that's brilliant. Thanks very much, guys. Just to mention, these aren't shared widely, so it was anonymous. I should have said that at the beginning. Doesn't matter.
It was an anonymous poll.
Okay, so moving on to what our view on the challenges is. So it's kind of, I'll talk through it. It kind of broadly agrees with you guys, actually. How a service provider is going to get value from this. So obviously, a software company sells its software to someone. Great, they get a license fee. But actually, that's only going to be a successful business model if their customers, so utility companies, product manufacturers can get value from themselves. So we've touched on the fact that we think this value is primarily, in theory, going to come from customer retention, so increased customer stickiness. But actually, we haven't seen any super standout examples of that happening, of where company X has said we've been able to retain X amount of customers and this has had Y amount of impact on our business. So this idea of customer stickiness is all well and good, but actually, will it actually happen? One of the interesting things that Kitty mentioned the other day actually was this may be because utilities have not applied it in anger to their entire customer base. So they selected trials, and by virtue of it being a trial, you don't actually realise that stickiness en masse. So that's a question. And ultimately, part of the deriving of value is whether the end customer sees any value from it. So the fact that this approach is so disaggregated through many different players doesn't lend itself well to making any money. We think there's confusion from a utility provider point of view. So which type of business model to go through, which software provider to utilize, which one suits their customers, which one provides the most insight, which one's insight is the most relevant to their customers. And that's certainly something that we've covered in our customer data analytics service as a trend, just the where to start piece. Which I think is reflected in the poll as well.
I will just say we are releasing a report on that exact topic in November.
Well, it's like we planned this, Kitty.
Indeed.
So I know none of you guys necessarily from the poll, this wasn't seen as a major issue, but we do think once all of these things are in place, the actual logistics of what we term boots on the ground, but the implementing physical measures is a real challenge. So the skills that people need to do that, getting people to site, making sure those measures actually work long term, we think is a potential issue and quite complex. And the last challenge, which is probably the ultimate challenge, is given all this insight, how do you actually get end users to change their behaviour? So, providing insight is great. That doesn't necessarily lead to action. And if it does, is that action long term? Does it have a lasting effect on someone's energy bill? I think there's a lot of research to suggest it doesn't. And we've seen quite a few of these software remote audit companies partnering with behavioural scientists to work out how to actually get customers, end users, to change their behaviour. So I think that's a question and potentially a real challenge. I think the last point on that actually is that fundamentally at some point these customers are the ones that pay for all of these measures, so it's got to be a real benefit to them, and that's something we come back to time and time and again in this service, is knowing the end user. So data can help you do that, but are there other factors that help those end users make decisions?
Yeah, definitely. If it's not of value to customers, it ultimately will fail, especially given the number of players in the market at the moment. But we're now going to move on to how we see this market evolving in the next couple of years. It varies depending on the business model under consideration. So starting with our first business model of single model building refits, this is the existing efficient consumption market. The established one with traditional approaches to efficiency such as double glazing and insulation. We think this represents a stable and mature market. That going forward, it's still going to be of value, people are still going to want it and require it, but we don't see any significant growth in this area over the next couple of years. With regards to we're still showing the poll. Apologies. I will just try and bring the slide back for you. We'll just bring that back. So we'll just carry on from here. That little picture is what we're using to show single model building refits. But moving on to the remote audits and customer engagement piece. we think that the use of customer data analytics shows significant promise, which I think, based on our first poll earlier today, you would agree with. Being able to control how you use energy and what actions you can take to try and save money and meaningfully reduce expenditure is valuable information to customers, and we think it will be important going forward, especially given the current climate of high energy bills and customer resentment. The use of data will also facilitate the development of new customer services options, such as time of use tariffs that I mentioned. And we think that this combination of enhanced service offerings plus new products and services will allow for these business models to continue at a significant rate of growth for the next few years at least. The number one challenge being that they will soon have to start showing quantitative impacts for the utilities. It is, generally speaking, the utilities that are footing the bill for this and carrying the risk, and they're going to need to see sufficient value in return to justify continued investment. I think at the moment there is a real fear of being left behind in this market, and so lots of people are jumping onto this bandwagon and see the potential for value to be extracted. But if that doesn't realise, then we will see companies being dropped and possibly stagnation. Finally, considering the retrofit business model, this has the potential to be incredibly disruptive. However, the market does yet need to be activated, and its fate currently rests in the hands of policymakers and financiers, who will need to establish a positive framework in which this business model can operate. Presently, it's a very niche offering and targeted only at specific segments, but with the right support, we see significant growth in this area, especially with housing organisations and in construction. Should this policy and financial support emerge, then we may well see the development of new business models that are hybrids of the two we featured, whereby personalised data analysis solutions support physical upgrades to deliver significant measurable change. No such offering is currently in the market that we are aware of, but we do think that it could be a viable option, provided the other two prove valuable.
So, just to summarise, thanks Kitty for that. And I think actually the that hybrid model would be fascinating, because it would be such a lovely combination of two things, which are big data having very personalised insights, and actually that translating into physical measures which actually have a long-term impact. So I think there is powerful. So if any one of you wants to start up a business, we think that's a great place to start.
There are definitely synergies.
Yeah, exactly. So just to recap, we covered off two key categories in this efficient consumption marketplace. One which looks at remote assessments of energy usage, and following on from that, customer engagement strategies, which in theory deliver value to both the customer, the utility, and provide revenue to the provider of that software platform. So that's the first one. Lots of innovation, lots of participants, but potentially some really big questions about whether it actually makes a significant enough impact. On the second category, which we think is really, really interesting, but very embryonic at this moment in time, this idea of approaching a building refurbishment as a product with multiple measures at a reasonable rate, we think is fascinating, has real potential to change the way we look at energy efficiency. But there are some really big questions about the ticket price and the overall cost to the customer, and having the right policy and financial frameworks in place to enable this to happen. So that's our summary of today. We would be really happy to take any questions if you've got any. So let me just check in there. So we've got one question. Let me just rephrase it. Okay, so you've talked about how software companies are providing data solutions. What about those utilities that are doing that themselves in-house? So we do see utilities looking at doing these software, developing software platforms themselves in-house. What we have, so for example,
Centrica.
Yeah.
Centrica have been developing their own in-house platform for a couple of years now, sort of in correlation with their connected homes offering.
And I think the challenge, which we think from a utility that wants to do that now, is going back to that point about iteration. You'd have to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, and you'd have to run through many different iterations to get to the same level of sophistication that companies who have been doing this for 4 or 5 years would be able to provide right now. I suppose the flip side of that is you would know exactly what you're looking for, so you could target what you've developed better.
Yeah, I'd say it's by no means impossible to start now and develop a viable option, but a significant amount of in-house resource will need to be dedicated towards developing this if it's going to be able to compete on the market.
Okay, yeah. So another question we've got is, do we know the economic benefit on monitoring a boiler and offering preventative maintenance, i.e. what would a customer be willing to pay for that kind of service? So we don't cover this specifically in the business model service, but 2 of our research services probably would look at this. One is our heat hub, so we have a couple of different heat research services, and also that's the kind of thing that we would push out to our customer panel. So that is asking customers directly what their willingness to pay, what their views on various different propositions are. So if you are interested in us doing that, we're certainly welcome to do it. Much more of a market survey, so not quite for this research service, but we will be able to look at that.
And on that, we have asked them previously, our customer panel, about their willingness to, or their response to thinking about upgrading a boiler before it's actually broken. And we had really interesting results to indicate that actually the market out there does seem to be thinking about these preemptive measures, and so not actually just waiting to the last minute or having to reactively respond to these concerns, but actually doing it preemptively, which could be an indication of their willingness to essentially potentially engage with these kind of propositions around remote maintenance and paying for that to negate the need to have to be worrying about that possible outcome.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, it's a really good point, actually. Thanks, Jenny. Another question that we've got, so someone referencing the model of energy performance contracts, which is very commonly used in the UK for funding the whole building retrofit market. So I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but basically the role of that can play in providing a measurement for performance and failure. So I think we do see that as probably one of the key data feeds, and one of the ways that you can assess how successful a measure has been. But actually, from a business model perspective, we see it as an input rather than a business model in itself, which hopefully answers that question. I think that seems to be all the questions for now. So what I'll do is I will just finish up to let you know that the next webinar we'll be looking at is lifestyle products in a couple of weeks. So that's looking at how the emerging market around connected homes and specifically products that speak to someone's lifestyle and more aesthetic quality are developing. So if you're interested, please do register for that. We will be following up, sending out an email with links to the webinar slides. Sorry, not the webinar slides, but links to the YouTube channel. But if you want slides, please do let us know and get in contact with us. Our details are will be at the front of at the bottom of that email. Thank you everyone for joining. Those are our contact details. If you've got any questions that you think about afterwards, please do get in contact with us. We're really happy to chat through any of our research.
And if you're interested in the slides, do let us know. I know that we left the poll up there accidentally, and that meant that we didn't show one of the slides actually around the 4 different challenges that we've identified. So that'll be in the slide pack that we prepare afterwards. So if you're interested in receiving that, then please do get in contact and let us know.
Yes, a good point. Thank you for your patience with our poll misfunctions.
Technical difficulties.
If you have any questions at all, let us know. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.